Welcome back to Wandering into Wellness.
Hey gang, how's it going?
Finn and Lydia as usual, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Ranae Von Meding, who is a writer, an activist, and the CEO of Equality for Children. Welcome, Ranae.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. I'm so excited to have you on. I've been following you on Instagram for a good while and following the Equality for Children journey, and it's something that really piqued my interest, but I also felt so much that I was ignorant of the situation, and I couldn't believe that I really didn't understand that. I mean, for me, I met someone, I fell in love, I got married, and then I had a baby, and it was just as simple as that for me. So lucky. But just to understand that for everyone in Ireland it isn't that way, and I think that it's a huge area that's being kind of shoved to the side. For the average person just isn't aware that there's even an issue around this. So I'd love for you to share your story with us, and just kind of maybe we could start at the beginning of when you grew up and you fell in love, and how did that go for you?
Perfect. Yeah. So I moved to Ireland when I was 4. I was born in the States, and we moved to Ireland, and I grew up here, had a very, I suppose, normal childhood. And when I was 21, I met my now wife in college. We were both studying theatre in Dublin. And up until that point, I had never been with a woman. It had just never occurred to me that was an option available to me. I never had a massive, I suppose, crisis and with my sexuality. I was always, I suppose, very happy dating men before that. But when I met Audrey, something just kind of sparked in me and something awakened in me. And I just realized that I was really connected to her as a human being. And it actually didn't really matter to me that she was a woman. It obviously was a big shock to me. And we started dating, and very early on, I could see my future with her, and I could see my life with her. And I kind of just, I knew that we would be together. And I think a lot of people in the early days were, kind of like, oh, it's a phase, and, it's not going to last. And, to all of those people, I say, well, we are, we're almost at our 13-year anniversary, and we have 2 kids. We've built a life together. There's literally no one else I would want to be with. It's not saying that it's been easy all the time, but yeah, that's kind of how the whole journey started, I suppose. And yeah, I guess early on when we started dating, I think even a couple of months into us going out, we were already talking about kids. We both very much wanted to become parents. It was never a question of would we have kids. It was just a matter of when and what that would look like. Obviously when I was growing up, I had this, picture in my head of what my life would look like. And I was going to marry a man, and we were going to have babies, and, we would do these like normal things. So when Audrey and I were dating, obviously talking about kids, we were kind of like, okay, well, it's not going to happen. It's not going to be quite as straightforward, but we'll make it happen one way or another. And I suppose that journey to figuring out how we would have kids really changed the trajectory of my life and of our life very much.
And where did you start? Like, I mean, whatever about now, where obviously we're podcasting and talking about this, there's a lot more resource around for people, day by day, there's more and more kind of discussion of this, and becomes a much more, the word accepted is wrong, because to say it's not accepted seems so wrong, but that idea that societally it's becoming like closer to a norm, let's say. Like, where were you looking for guidance on those things? Was there supports for you?
No, absolutely not. So we're talking about maybe 2014, start of 2015, when we were starting to kind of be ready. And there was nothing. There was just literally no information. There were no, from within Ireland, I'm saying, there were no blogs, there were no Instagram accounts, there were no YouTubers, there was just nothing. Any information we got was from the States, from Canada, from Australia, from other countries, and from, you know, content that was not necessarily applicable to Ireland. And so we didn't know what our options were, what were we allowed to do in a fertility clinic if one of us wanted to become pregnant. We didn't know about the process for selecting a sperm donor. We didn't know, was adoption legal for two gay parents. We didn't know anything. And you know, I suppose early on we decided that we very much wanted to try and have a pregnancy ourselves as opposed to going down the adoption route. So we decided that I would like to carry, because for me, I've always wanted to be pregnant. I always wanted the experience of breastfeeding. That was something that was really important to me. And whereas with Audrey, she's kind of like, I'll take one for the team if I have to. But she was just really lucky that she married me and that I really wanted to be pregnant. You know, I meet a lot of women who are like, damn it, if only, like, you know, my partner could carry and I didn't have to. So, you know, she's lucky that she married me. But we were talking about it, and again, we didn't know anything about the process. And one night we said, wouldn't it be really cool if we could use your eggs, as in Audrey's eggs, use donor sperm, create embryos, and then I would carry the babies.
Wow.
So that way they'd be genetically yours, but I would be gestationally carrying them. So there would be a really strong, tangible link to both of us. And lo and behold, we Googled, and it was a thing that you could do. It was called, you know, and it is called reciprocal IVF. And our minds were blown. We were like, how cool is that we have the opportunity to do this? How cool is it that we have two uteruses, we have loads of eggs, you know, there's just permutations of how this could work. Isn't that really cool? So we went to Sims in 2015, which is one of, you know, the big clinics, and was one of the big clinics at that time. And we were told very nicely, we're sorry, but we can't help you, not because we were two women, but because at the time reciprocal IVF was not licensed for in the Irish clinics. Now, just to be clear, the licenses that the clinics have and the legislation governing the children born of these procedures are entirely different. So just from the clinic side, they just didn't have a license from the HPRA. They just couldn't do it. So they said, we can either do a standard IVF with your own eggs and donor sperm, or an IUI or whatever, or you can go abroad and do the procedure abroad. And I think by that evening, we had decided we were going to go to Spain. We had our heart set on it at that point, and we knew that was what was ahead of us. And I'm so glad we did, because, you know, we wouldn't have the children that we have if we didn't.
And is that the fact that it was licensed in Spain, and obviously legislatively as well, like catered for, is that a reflection of a more progressive attitude to different kind of gender versions of parenting?
I don't even think it's the gender. I wouldn't say it's a gender versions of parenting. I think it's like things have been just going so slowly in terms of like reproductive options for people. And, you know, at one point you couldn't even access IVF treatment or fertility care treatment if you weren't a married couple. And that's still a married heterosexual couple. You know, single people couldn't access fertility treatment. And there are still places, and there's still places in Europe that you have to be married, man and woman married, in order to access care. You can't be a gay couple, you can't be a single person. And it's this idea of, it's this heteronormative, you know, man, woman, children sort of ideal. And I think that's kind of where it started. I think obviously the fertility field has, you know, expanded and is very much embraces, you know, all people at this point in time, but the kind of the licenses just hadn't, at least at that point, caught up to it. Like, just to give you an example, so reciprocal IVF is now licensed for, and most of the clinics can offer it now, which is amazing for people now in Ireland who can access that service and not have to travel abroad like we did. But there are still certain things that you can't do in Ireland that you can do elsewhere. So like in order to so you can get sperm donors, no problem. Like that's something that we've been doing for years and years. You know, there is now legislation that sperm donors have to be identifiable. So there is kind of some legislation about what type of sperm you can use, but you can do it. And that's just, you know, plain sailing. However, when it comes to egg donation, in order to use egg donors, and when you're looking at it, and what's the difference between an egg donor and a sperm donor? They're both just genetic material. One is not more important than the other, like they're, you know. So but if you want to use an egg donor, you have to create embryos abroad and then bring the embryos back into Ireland to use them.
What?
So it's bizarre. So you can't bring eggs into the country to use them, but you can bring embryos into the country to use them.
Oh, it's so convoluted. What the hell?
So bizarre.
And you'd wonder why, like, what is the separation point legally, or where do they think that that's a different thing?
It feels...
No, I don't.
It feels like an ideation element. It does. I mean, it's difficult not to spring to the idea of the patriarchal thing, isn't it? It's very difficult not to. I'm sitting here as a cis white male. I'm kind of going, I feel like my kind of responsible for this.
And I think, I don't know, I think it kind of harks back to, like, in Ireland, I feel like, you know, like us as two women, I think we have it easier than two men who are raising a child, because everyone loves the idea of an Irish mammy, and, like, you know, the mother is the most important thing, you know, whatever about the sperm, but it's like the egg, the mother, that is, like, you know, the holy grail. And I don't know if it kind of is linked back to that at all. But for me, like, I don't believe that, you know, genetic material doesn't make you a parent. Giving birth,
that's a really interesting discussion, isn't it?
Giving birth doesn't make you a parent. It's about so much more than that.
Yeah, it's like love not being a feeling, love is an activity. Yeah, it's that thing again, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many nuances that you could kind of get lost in there. So tell me, when you were thinking, you decided, okay, we're going to Spain, had you involved your wider family at this point? Had you told them what you were going to do? What were their opinions on it? Were they sharing, supportive? What? So
at the time, I think we told one person on each side of our family. Everyone knew that we wanted to have kids, but didn't necessarily know how and when we were going to do that. So what we ended up doing was going to Barcelona for a month, just to do the whole process, as opposed to back and forth for, you know, scans and medication and bloods and everything. We just were like, let's just go and do it and hope that it works. And so we didn't tell anyone. Everyone just thought we were taking a break and just having a bit of time away off of work, and just, you know, renting a house in the sun, and it was gorgeous. And you know, looking back, that was really hard, because we obviously had no support then, and we were in a different country, and we had no idea what we were doing, and we were trying to liaise with a foreign clinic, which anyone who's gone through fertility treatment is not an easy thing to do. You're dealing with, you know, a language barrier, you know, things are different, and you just don't have that continuity of care that you would have if you were going through medical or fertility treatment at home. So it was difficult, and we didn't have that support network. So yeah, it was really difficult. And something I always say to people is that if you are going through fertility treatment, that you need your people around you. You just do. And just to take away some of that, like, you know, for us, I suppose we didn't have that feeling of shame. And I think a lot of heterosexual people who go through fertility treatment do sometimes have that feeling of shame, of needing help. You know, with us, two women, it's a no-brainer that we're going to need some fertility assistance. We don't necessarily suffer from infertility. So we didn't have that, but there is still kind of stigma that goes with fertility treatment sometimes. And, you know, I feel that people going through it really do need the support of their family and friends, and just to kind of normalize it as part of the conversation. Like if you're trying naturally for a baby, a lot of times you'll tell people that you're trying. So why not, you know, why not involve people in your fertility journey, even if it looks a little bit different?
It's literally exactly the same thing. I mean, it's literally, apart from the biological act, you know. And so when you say you told only one person in each of your families, was that because of a sense of the stigma, or is that because you guys had a little bit of a apprehension because you didn't know if it was a guaranteed outcome yet, or what was the thing?
I think it was both of those things. We didn't know if it was going to work, and we didn't want people asking us all the time if it worked or not. And also just because, actually, do you know what? I think we also kind of wanted to keep it a little bit of a secret. It was like our kind of special thing that we were doing. So there was an element of that as well. Now, I will say, fast forwarding to our second baby, that it was an entirely different experience, because I was pretty much live tweeting the experience. You know, we did a blog, we were putting out videos. We didn't tell people like the day that we were pregnant, but we did like the day after we got a positive pregnancy test. You know, we kept it to ourselves for like a day, but it was just an entirely different experience, because at that stage we realized how helpful it could be to other people to see you going through this experience. So we didn't keep it to ourselves the second time around.
And just to demystify this thing for me, as somebody who's never really been inside that world of IVF or kind of fertility clinics, when you're like choosing sperm, what do you get as in, like, how does that process work?
Yeah, so it's like, I suppose it was different for us because we were going abroad. So what I would, you know, talk about is like the process now in Ireland. So as I said, you can only choose an identifiable donor. So there's 3 types of donors in the world. There's known donor, which is someone that you know personally. So whether that's a friend or, you know, someone, your partner's family member, you know, sometimes you hear of sisters donating eggs to their sisters, or, you know, that type of thing. So that is what you would call a known donor. An anonymous donor is someone who you do not know. They have donated anonymously. There's no identifying information about them, and you can never access information about them. Children conceived as a result of their donation can never access information about them. That's anonymous. So those are like the 2 opposite ends. And then in the middle is what's called identifiable or traceable, sometimes it's called. What that means is that they have donated sperm or eggs with no intention to have a relationship with you, with any child conceived, but they have made their information available on a registry, so that if a child who's conceived as a result of their donation wishes to contact them in the future, once they turn 18, they will have last known address, name, and, you know, a PPS number, not you know, the equivalent for whatever country, some sort of number that would help them to trace the donor. Doesn't mean that the donor is in any way a parent or is in any way linked to that child, but it just gives the child a bit more power, I suppose, in tracing genetic heritage, if that's something that they want to do. So in Ireland now, the process is, there's a lot of different, like if we're talking about donor sperm, there's a lot of different sperm banks, and some of the clinics will make the selection for you, and some of the clinics will allow you to make the selection yourself, which obviously it's a better process, because then you have a bit more control over that selection process. You go online, you type in details. So say, for example, with Audrey and I, we obviously got a sperm donor that was more similar to me, because my genetics were not being involved in the creation of the embryos. So we obviously wanted someone who essentially was the male version of me, you know, so someone with my hair color, someone with my eye color, someone who, you know, similar height. If I was born male, I would be a slightly, you know, a bit taller, just similar body type, you know, that sort of thing.
Interesting.
Those are usually the kind of things that you're looking for. You're looking for the intending parent to kind of replace those genes, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's what most people do. Some people just completely throw that all out the window and just pick, someone who's like blonde and blue eyes, and it's really up to the individual or the couple what they
and
want.
do you get like details about not just what they physically look like, but the type of person they are, what their interests are?
You can, and again, it depends sperm bank to sperm bank, how much information they give you. Some of the sperm banks, you have the option of paying a little bit more money to get a more detailed profile, but you're still not going to be getting a full bio on them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were in Spain, you did that first round, and how did that go?
So that was in September 2015, and we had a fresh embryo transfer, which means you create embryos and they're immediately put back in, like 5 days later. And I did have an early pregnancy test, but then it was just a super early miscarriage. And, that was, I guess we were really sad about it, but we weren't completely devastated, because it wasn't like we had been trying for ages and ages, and we knew that we had options still. It wasn't, this is our only chance, so we kind of processed that, and then 2 months later I went back for a frozen embryo transfer, which is almost identical, except that the embryos have been already frozen. They're then thawed and transferred back to the uterus. And that was when I got pregnant with our first daughter, Ava, who actually just turned 5.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Yeah. And so, did it feel like for you, as like you were saying, so your first gay relationship was with the lady who you've now had that baby with Audrey. Did it feel in any ways, like, because you were saying it kind of like it blew out of the water the version of the parenting that you thought you'd be doing? What did it feel like? Did it feel very odd, or did it feel totally normal when it happened, or how did that feel?
Oh no, completely normal, because she's just a person, I'm just a person, and we're just two people making a baby, and it was completely normal. The only reason I describe ourselves as same-sex parents is to just kind of clarify with people up front that I have a wife and I am a woman. But other than that, like, we're not same-sex parents, we're just parents, just people. There's no difference. There's no difference between, like, me and my brother and his wife, or we all face the same challenges, albeit maybe we face some additional ones.
How was it in the birthing system in Ireland? Did you meet any challenges there?
I wouldn't say, no, obviously I'm talking about 2016 when we had Ava, and at the moment there's obviously a lot of challenges in the birthing system, and my heart just goes out to anyone who's going through that at the moment. But at the time, no, Audrey was never like refused access. We were married at the time, so we were treated like any other married couple in the system. However, sometimes forms were not up to scratch, and forms were very heteronormative, and you would have to change some forms and stuff, and that just was a bit like icky. But for the most part, like, anyone we encountered along the way was very respectful, very wanting to be inclusive, even if they didn't necessarily understand the nuances of our relationship and our pregnancy journey. But we never had any bad experiences. The funny experience we had about 2 days after I gave birth was that a junior consultant or something came around doing his rounds on the ward in the rotunda, and was stopped into our like little cubicle, and I think I was probably breastfeeding, or I just had no top on, and Audrey is sitting there, and we're just both exhausted, and he kind of like didn't know where to look in the first place. He was just kind of like, just, this is really awkward. I'm like, really? You work in the rotunda and it's awkward to see someone with like trying to breastfeed? Like, why? Anyways, so he was just a bit like awkward and jumpy, and he asked, he was talking to me, and I was like, this is my wife, Audrey. And that kind of was, he was like, oh, okay, yeah. And then he was going through his checklist and, you know, going through all the things like, have we done this? Have we done this? Blah, blah, blah. And then he gets to, and what are you going to do for contraception? And Audrey and I just looked at each other, and then we looked at him, and we were like, well, we're married, so that's not an issue. And it literally just went over his head. He was like, yeah, but have you thought about contraception? I was like, no
way. He's still pushing the point. Come on.
He was still pushing it, but I think he was just so caught off guard and so awkward about it
he was just like, boobs,
repeating himself. This is on my checklist, I have to ask you.
A bit does not compute. Just
couldn't. And then I think he just kind of like faded out into the background. He just kind of left. It was just so weird. It was like, it's just so basic.
I know.
But like, what would you say in terms of percentages of parenting? I don't know if you have any idea about this, of parents and parenting couples are in your situation in Ireland. Is it minuscule? Like, how many women are doing what you're doing?
Like, no, it's not minuscule. And look, as the years go on, the numbers are growing, of course, because, you know, if you're looking at Ireland, like in the early 90s, it was still illegal to be gay, you know. So of course there's going to be generations of people who were afraid to just exist, let alone think about becoming parents. Whereas, you know, as the years go on, you know, all people are being embraced more and more. So the younger generation are going to have less and less reservations about becoming parents. And it's just going to become a natural progression, as it is with the majority of people who go into adulthood. You know, obviously not everyone wants to become a parent, and that's completely cool. I don't think you should become a parent if you don't want to. But for the majority of people, you know, you get to a certain age and you're kind of like thinking about it, you know. And I think the younger generation are just going to, it's just going to be easier. It's going to be more seamless. It's going to be like, well, yeah, now I've done that, and now I'm going to think about having kids. What are my options? So no, we don't have any statistics or numbers as such. But if you look at how much of the population identify as LGBTQ+, again, we don't have a number on that, but from other countries, it does seem to be anywhere between, you know, 6 to 15% of the population. So you could from that deduct that, you know, how many heterosexual people in Ireland become parents, you know, and you can kind of take a figure from that. So like at the moment, there's thousands and thousands of LGBTQ+ parents, and that number is just growing all the time. And I suppose it's, you know, it's obviously slightly different when you have two women, or you have, you know, a woman and a trans man, you know, people who can physically carry a pregnancy themselves. That is much more straightforward. When you have a couple who do not have the capability to carry a pregnancy, things obviously become a lot more complicated, because then they have to find a third party who will carry a pregnancy for them.
So when did you become aware of the issues that made you start the Equality for Children campaign? When did you know that going into having your first baby, that there might be some issues around this? Were you aware of that before, or was that something that just came to light in the natural progression of things?
Yes and no. When we got pregnant, no, we had no idea. When we got pregnant, we thought that we were married. We had marriage equality in Ireland. Of course, we would just be treated like any other married couple. Of course we would. And I think that is what a lot of Irish people still believe. And unfortunately, I'll burst your bubble and tell you it's just not true. Marriage equality did not change anything for LGBTQ+ people when it comes to parenting. It changed nothing. It simply allows for you to legally get married, but those rights within the marriage don't extend to the family the same way they do with a heterosexual marriage. So no, we had no idea. And I suppose we started hearing some things kind of just through Facebook threads and just chatter, I suppose, when I was pregnant. And it wasn't until I was quite heavily pregnant in the summer of 2016 that we went to like a solicitor, and we found out that actually no, when I gave birth, I would be considered the legal parent, because under the Irish Constitution, a person who gives birth is the biological mother, which obviously, you know, we run into issues when we're talking about surrogacy then as well, because a surrogate at this point in time is considered a biological mother, even though they usually have no biological link whatsoever to the children born through surrogacy. But yes, for us, because I was giving birth, I was considered the biological mother of Ava. Audrey, who actually is her biological mother, and also my wife, also co-parents, would just be a legal stranger to her, complete legal stranger to her. And so we did know this before I gave birth, but I suppose we were, you know, just trying to figure out our way as becoming first-time parents, and it kind of got pushed to the back of our minds a bit. And we were like, look, we'll get it sorted out. We'll do something. We'll take a legal case. We'll fix it. And it wasn't until we went to register her birth that it really just hit home. And the day we registered Ava's birth in Lombard Street in Dublin, anyone who's given birth and registered their child in there, for most people, you remember it as like one of those days where you go, you register, you go get tea and cake afterwards. It's a celebration. It's really exciting. But for us, it turned out to be one of the most devastating days of our lives. It was just, it was awful. Like, and I can't explain the feeling that we had sitting there in a room of other new parents and knowing that our child was being discriminated against simply because she had two moms, simply because of how she was conceived. And it was just devastating, because even then, knowing that if Audrey was a man and we had used donor sperm, which a lot of people do, there would have been no issue. We would have just rocked up right up and said, she's the dad, end of. There's no genetics test. There's no nothing. Like, it's just, if we're a man and a woman, they would have been fine.
And so, if she was a trans man, would it have been fine?
So this was 2016. So gender recognition was 2015. It would have been difficult.
Yeah.
Now it would be fine.
Okay.
But at the time, it still would have been difficult at the time. Things have changed a little bit now, but no, at the time it still would have been difficult. Yeah. So that was just devastating, obviously, and we went.
What do you do? Sorry, what do you do with that knowledge? I mean, obviously you're floored, and I imagine, I mean, that's really traumatic for you as parents, and particularly because you're sitting there as the de facto parent, but you're really having to console your partner or your wife who's now not the parent. And like, how long is it then before you decide what action you're taking, and what does the action look like, and what's evolved out of that?
I suppose at the time, we just felt really helpless because there was nothing that we could do. There was nothing we could do. This was the law, and, you know, shouting and screaming and stomping about it in the registrar's office was not going to change it. And we were both just so exhausted anyways, just by life and, you know, new baby and everything. And it was just so sad. And when we went in, the registrar was like, who is the mother? And we were like, well, we both are. And she's like, yeah, but who gave birth? And I said, I didn't. And she was like, okay, well, Ranae, I'm just going to be talking to you now.
Wow.
And literally did not even look at Audrey. And I don't know, for that registrar, was she having a bad day, or is that just how she like compartmentalizes? But it was really pretty shit. Like the way, so much so that when we ended up having to do the same thing with our second daughter and register again as a single parent, Audrey didn't even come because she couldn't. It was just too much.
I get it.
Yeah, it was just, it was awful. So I suppose in those early days, what did I do? What was the action? I started talking about it. I started talking about it to anyone who would listen. We did our first magazine interview with my sister-in-law, Roberta, who runs a magazine called Mums and Tots. And we were on the front cover back in December of 2016 with a tiny newborn Ava, and that was the first of many magazine articles, newspaper interviews, radio interviews, television interviews, and we just did a whole lot of publicity and press. And since then have had to share a lot of personal details, and to be honest, I kind of resent it a bit. I resent having had to share so much of our life. I don't necessarily mind sharing it for the purpose of helping other people and, just making other people feel less alone. But to have to use your story in order to get basic human rights afforded to your child just seems a bit wrong. But that's kind of all we could do at the time, was just tell our stories and try to get people angry about it and try to get people saying, this is not right, what can we do? And that kind of continued for a couple of years on and off. Again, life is busy and just trying to work and raise a child. And then we were trying to go through the fertility treatment process again, trying to have another baby. It wasn't as straightforward this time. But then we were really lucky and we had Aria on New Year's Eve 2018. New Year's Day 2019, I remember we were in the Coombe this time, and I remember in there with Aria and just knowing that we were still in the same situation. It just reignited this like deep rage in me. And I remember just making a decision that day, just being like, no, we have to do something. How are we still here? It's 2019. We passed marriage equality in 2015, and yet we're still here. We're still like in a position where I have to sign for the heel prick test because my wife can't sign it for her own child. We're still in this position. Like, it's not okay. And so we kind of reignited that drive to do a lot of publicity, and we were on like Ireland AM when Aria was only like 2 weeks old. I look back at the footage and I was like a shell of myself, but we did it because we were just trying to get people to understand what was going on. But a lot happened that year in 2019, and in October of 2019, after just a lot of things had kind of snowballed, we, along with a group of other parents who were in the same situation, ended up forming a campaign, an organization called Equality for Children, with the sole intention of fighting for legislation that would cover and protect all children born to LGBTQ plus families in Ireland. So that was end of 2019. And I'm the CEO of that organization, and we have, had to contend with COVID and being a baby organization, only just kind of getting off the ground, and then COVID hit and we couldn't have any more in-person events and everything had to go online. But like, I'm really proud of our team and what we've achieved in like a year and a half. And we have a really, really strong group of volunteers.
And talk to us about the reception you've had, because I presume you're doing like lobbying at a legislative level is kind of the biggest job, I guess, to change that. Talk to us about the reception you've had from people who are in positions, politicians or whatever, TDs, etc.
Overwhelmingly positive, overwhelmingly so.
Okay.
And, so we obviously dealt with the previous government and we were really making great headway there. And then we got landed with the new government and had to kind of start from scratch again. But anyone we have had meetings with, we have spoken to, has been very much on a personal level in support of just making sure that children have basic legal protections and access to both of their parents on a human level, but translating that kind of on a human level to at government level and making sure that there's a will and a political drive and a cross-departmental approach to make sure that we get the legislation that we need. It doesn't always translate. Just because someone personally might be in support of something doesn't mean it's going to happen or happen very quickly.
Yeah.
And has anything changed?
Yes. So things have changed. So since we had our children, new legislation finally came in last year in May, and it's called the Children and Family Relationships Act, or the CFRA. And, you know, so some people watching this maybe are saying, oh no, but I know same-sex parents do have rights now. I heard it in the news. So basically, yes, new laws came in last year after a 5-year delay, I might add. But they did come in finally last year. And what that means is that same-sex female couples who meet the criteria can now both be recognized as parents. So if you're a same-sex female couple and you tick all of these boxes and have conceived and birthed your child in a certain way, then you can have legal recognition. But the criteria are very narrow. So these are the criteria: that you're a female couple, you use an Irish fertility clinic, you do IVF, IUI, or reciprocal IVF, you use an identifiable sperm donor, and then your child is born in Ireland. So if you meet all those criteria, you can both go on the birth cert. Now, I will say, caveat that with, if you conceived your children prior to May of last year, and you meet most of those criteria, but you used a foreign clinic or you used an anonymous sperm donor, those are kind of the two amnesties, but only if the children were conceived before May of last year. So there's a lot of people who would fall into that kind of, I suppose, amnesty. So people who maybe had their kids, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, used a clinic abroad, but then their children were born here, you would be covered then. But if you choose to have more children in that way, going to a foreign clinic or using an anonymous donor, and you do that now, you wouldn't be covered. So
and reciprocal IVF, you're not covered either, is that it?
Yes, so reciprocal IVF is covered. And I suppose this has been a bit of a complicated one, because initially when the CFRA legislation was coming in, it wasn't clear whether or not reciprocal IVF would be included. And a variety of things happened, including our family bringing a case against the state. Very long story, but basically it is now included.
Well done.
Which is great news. Funny, we still haven't been able to get our kids' birth certs changed, but there's a lot of factors in that. But we are covered. Our children are covered. However, if we choose to use our embryos that we have in our clinic abroad, which we do 100% want to do, those children will not be covered.
I was thinking what happens if someone, sorry, I've heard of lots of people going, we want to use the same sperm donor for, you know, all the babies that we have. So there's this common thread. And if that sperm donor's sperm comes from Spain or somewhere and they've already had 2 kids there, that means they either can't use the same one, or that one kid doesn't count in the same family unit.
And there's, you know what, there's a lot of imbalance created in families because of this new legislation. There are so many families where one child is covered and has equal legal rights to their parents, and another child only has one legal parent. Like siblings. Like, how can you possibly, you know, look at siblings and say, no, you can have it, you can't. It's crazy.
And you're saying, so all gay men couples, they aren't covered at all.
So if we look at the cohort of people that are covered, then the people who aren't covered, so if we're looking at female couples, it's anyone who uses a non-clinical way to get pregnant, which a lot of people do, because a lot of female couples don't have fertility issues. And if they want to use their own eggs anyways, and they just need sperm is the only missing ingredient, and they can get sperm and they can get a home insemination kit on Amazon, then why would they not do that? And a lot of people choose to conceive in that way. It's much cheaper. It's usually much quicker, usually much less stressful. But if you choose to do that, your children will not be protected by the law. So non-clinical methods are not covered. Known donors are not covered, which is completely wrong in my opinion, because the government should not be the ones to say what type of sperm you can use, in what ways you can become pregnant. Are those like limitations put on other people? Like, no, like if I was a heterosexual in a heterosexual relationship, my husband sperm, we couldn't use my husband's sperm for whatever reason, and we choose to use, say, his brother, just for like some random scenario, his brother would donate. Like, why can we not do that? That's, you know, that would be our choice. And
that's bizarre. It's like they're trying to control or alter the relationship that the child then has with its father at whatever level. It seems bizarre. Do you know anything about the reasoning behind that? Is there actually a like some sort of guidance as to why that legislation was enacted in that way? Or
I suppose the CFRA legislation was, when it was first drafted in 2015, a long time ago, was a bit broader and it included more things. And then as it went, the legislators were narrowing it down and they were like, well, let's just take the most simple approach. And the most straightforward, simple approach, let's be honest, is when you have two women, it's taking place in Ireland, so you can govern what's happening in Irish clinics. The identifiable sperm donors, so there can be a registry of donors, which will be held in Ireland. You know, it's very straightforward. But the thing is, our paths to parenthood are not always straightforward. And you can't punish children who are conceived or birthed in a particular way just because the legislation is not there. So yeah, so non-clinical methods, known donors, anonymous donors, any forms of surrogacy. So obviously when we're talking about two men having a biological child and not adopting, it is always going, well, it's not always, sometimes it's co-parenting as well, but it's usually through surrogacy. And there is no legislation for surrogacy in Ireland. So whether you're a same-sex male couple or you're a heterosexual couple accessing surrogacy, it doesn't matter. If you access surrogacy, only one parent is ever going to be considered a legal parent to your child. And it's devastating for families. You know, children born through surrogacy have the least protections of all.
And that's really just to think through the fallout of that. It means that ultimately, say you used a surrogate and she lives in Spain, and then for some reason she decides to say at some point in the future, actually, that's my child, I want that child back. She has the right to fight for that.
Under Irish law,
Irish law.
Yeah.
And also the crazy thing, like looking at end of life, which I know is way down the tracks, but all of those children that might be in the families where you have mixed, you know, parent, whatever, like connection from a legislative, that's going to be a nightmare for wills, like a nightmare.
Totally, because if, so
Imagine?
okay, so I'll just take Audrey and I again, for example. As I said, we are covered. So we hope to get our kids sorted out very soon, you know, as soon as we can. But if we take today, right now, I'm still the only one on the birth cert right now. So technically, if Audrey and I were 90, I passed away, then Audrey was still there and she had dementia or she just couldn't make decisions for herself. Our kids couldn't, like, they would be legal strangers. They, you know,
that's so weird.
You know, making medical decisions or decisions about like going into a facility or whatever, they would be treated like legal strangers. And the same goes for her side of the family. They would be treated as legal strangers when it comes to inheritance and, you know.
Or if something happened to you, she wouldn't have the right to automatically parent your children.
No.
Yeah. And again, this for us is going to be resolved very soon, which I'm very grateful for. But for anyone in that situation, if the legal parent passes away or is incapacitated, the other parent does not have any automatic rights to their child. The best that anyone can do at the moment is apply for guardianship, but you can only apply for guardianship after a child turns 2, or you have lived with a child for 2 years.
And you can imagine in maybe some situations, probably many situations, where there's maybe more adversarial scenarios where the parents don't agree with the choices that couple made and they're more conservative, a lot more conservative from a different time. There's going to be a fight there. There's going to be a serious struggle. Yeah, okay, that's what there's so many ramifications. It's when it really spirals out, doesn't it?
I think that people hearing the issue who aren't in it and who haven't inhabited this world probably don't understand, haven't even thought through the ramifications.
I haven't,
that.
honestly.
Like really, they haven't thought it and gone, oh, it's actually a huge issue. In their head, they're like, oh, well, yeah, it's not great, but like, you know, they're living together and everything. They're not thinking, how does that work out?
And what I would always say to people in those situations is to just look at your life and look at your children, and then imagine that your child's other parent is suddenly nothing to them in the eyes of the law. And what would that mean for your family? What would that mean just like on a daily basis for one person always having to be the one to like set up a bank account or sign a
social welfare,
you know, bring them for a vaccination, do like just anything that requires parental consent or responsibility. Imagine if that was all down to one person. The other person just couldn't be involved in any of that at all on a legal basis. And then if something happened to you as the legal parent, and just feel that weight of responsibility of you, you know, as the legal parent, and just kind of being like, well, nothing can happen to me. I can never be unavailable.
Yeah, literally that. Yeah. So speak to us about like, for those people like us, who others in kind of like within Ireland, in the Irish community of all types, what's the sort of stuff that we can do to support the work that you're doing?
So I suppose like obviously legislation is what we need. That is the end goal. So we are doing that. We are lobbying. But what we need is the support of the public to continue that work. We need the awareness raised within the public, because as we've all seen, legislation can happen very slowly or it can happen very quickly. And a lot of that is dependent on how much public pressure is being put on the government to fix something. And I always say this, if everyone who voted yes in 2015 knew that this was happening, something would change a lot quicker. Because a lot of people voted yes for families and for children. So we really need to like mobilize the public to be talking about this. It's not okay. It's not something that's not, you know, it's grand, we'll sort it out soon. This is urgent, you know. Kids are left in an unsafe position. It's important. We need to change it now. We don't need to change it in 10 years. And so we need people to really be putting pressure on their local politicians. You know, just, it's so simple. Like we have a tool on our website that you can go on and search for your local TDs. You type in where you are, you'll get a list of all your representatives, all their email addresses. All you have to do is copy and paste. And we have a template that you can copy and paste and just put in your name, send it off. Like we know for a fact that that works, because we've been told by government officials that that's one of the most, you know, it's the easiest and cheapest way to get people's attention. If someone gets an email from 50 people, they're gonna look at it and they're gonna be like, hey, what is this? Why are so many people emailing about this?
Yeah, I've heard a lot about the PAs to TDs and how they get like parsed this version of like what your morning's inbox looks like.
Yeah.
And it's just how much you annoy them, essentially. If it's annoying to the PA, it's annoying to the TD, things happen. You don't need to engage their heartstrings.
No, not at all. It's just like, okay, what's the content here? Okay, 90% is this, so I'm going to deal with that. And that's just something really actionable that people can do today. Like it's not hard to do, and you can do it while you're watching TV. It doesn't take any sort of brain power. It's just copying and pasting. You know, you can tweet all your local politicians. Anytime there's a by-election, you can ask your representatives when they come to your door, did you know about this? What are you planning to do about it? You know, obviously people can help in a more physical way. We are completely volunteer led. People can donate to, you know, the organizational costs and running of our campaign. People can volunteer with us. We have volunteers actually all over the world. That's one of the pros to COVID, is that everything is now digital. So all of our volunteer meetings are all online. You know, so people can get involved if they have any sort of time and any sort of skills, whether it be social media or, They might have a background in lobbying, you know, it doesn't matter. We can use everybody. Everybody who believes that this is an important issue that needs to be fixed. So I suppose the real end goal here is legislation. And we are in, I suppose, a crucial moment because this is on the program for government, a bill around assisted human reproduction, which mainly involves surrogacy, but also involves some of those other things we were talking about, like known donors, non-clinical conceptions, foreign births, foreign conceptions, all of that. This is all going to be dealt with in a thing called the Assisted Human Reproduction Bill. That is going to happen like imminently, you know, they're off at the moment, they're going to be coming back soon. This is on the program. And what we need is for them to accept a lot of recent recommendations that have been made around how that bill needs to evolve, how it needs to include international surrogacy as well as domestic surrogacy. It needs to allow for retrospective recognition, because at one point they were talking about only legislating for surrogacy going forwards, which is completely crazy because you're giving more rights to theoretical kids than you are to the actual thousands of kids who exist. You know, so it's making sure that what they propose in the next stage is going to be acceptable and suitable for our modern families, whether those are children born through surrogacy to heterosexual or gay parents, or their children who were maybe conceived abroad and then families moved back here. You know, because like at the moment, if you're a family who have children in Canada, you're both fully recognized as parents over in Canada, and then you come back to Ireland. So the second you land on home soil, your rights are stripped. Your children's rights are stripped. It's completely crazy.
It's wild. Okay.
Okay, so we can put links to all those things.
Absolutely.
And just call out to all our followers to get involved.
And do our own bit of emailing as well.
Do the emailing and just try to continue to raise awareness on this topic. And I think, you know, as a mom myself, you really feel it. You really feel like it's ridiculous that my child has more rights than your child. That's insane, just by dint of the fact that he was
no child should have more rights than another. Like it seems just so basic.
So basic and so important. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, your personal story, and for like going into those little nuances which are hard to tease out for people who just really aren't aware of it. And I think you're right, it's absolutely the case that there isn't awareness. People have a notion that marriage equality passed and therefore with it all those rights just came naturally alongside it, and we need to get that message out with clarity, I think.
Absolutely. So all that remains is for us to thank our sponsors. And so we'd like to say thank you to Newzest, our nutrition partners, who do a great job bringing plant-based and organically grown protein, as well as good green stuff and kids good stuff as well. A fantastic mixed multivitamin, all whole food based, great nutrition for mums and dads to have some kind of like a guaranteed basis for getting food into their kids for all our favorite picky eaters. And also to Clear Light Saunas, for those of you who want to get a bit of hot and cold into your life. It's my addiction, and I'm trying to encourage people all the time to get addicted into it. But yeah, so come and talk to us about your wishes to be putting a little hot box in your garden. And then just thanks to Ranae, and that's been, I mean, just such clarity. And I think anybody who you just can't raise a point that disagrees with you. You're just it's such a coherent and logical thing. It's just a case of getting it done now and doing the work. So thank you very much for standing up for all of our children. You know, it's a big deal. Thanks a million, guys. Bye.
Bye.